Grab and Go Growth Tactics. I'm Jim Wilcox. I'm the owner of the Sandler Performance Center here in Northern Indiana. I have locations in Fort Wayne and South Bend. We're serving the great state of Indiana, particularly the northern half. John Vanderslice, if you are here because of John, he sends his regards. He has something he has to attend to, and if he makes it at all, it will be very late. My guess is that he'll sit this one out, but he does send his regards to everybody. And then the person standing in for the handsome devil on the right there, Mr. Tim Berry. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm the old version of my picture. I'm Tim Berry. I'm the Sandler Performance Center owner in Fort Worth, Texas, and happy to be here as always. This is just a wonderful 30-minute smash and grab go for tactics on sales stuff, and we got a fantastic session today set up and ready to go. So James, take us away.
Yeah, so not only sales stuff, but management topics as well. This is one that can apply to either side. I believe this is, Tim, our 33rd or 34th one of these. For those of you that are new, the idea here is to take a quick look at a topic. They're not meant to be all-encompassing over 30 minutes, but a quick look and a quick takeaway. That's the goal here. Today, we're going to talk about dealing with difficult clients. If you're new, I want you to get your chat fingers warmed up. We want to engage you guys in the chat function. So the first question is, do you have to deal with difficult clients? Do you have one? And if so, how long has that client been around, that individual or that company difficult client? How long have they been around? So throw that in chat now. Would love to see it. Some of you may not have to deal with it. Janine, yes, and too long. Interesting. Tim, we have to deal occasionally with difficult clients, although, we tend to be, we're blessed in some ways that, our ideal clients are the people that we truly want to work with. Those people are typically motivated, but certainly, maybe today, but certainly in the past, you've had difficult clients, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
they take a toll on you.
Of course, it's I call them the life-sucking vortex because the difficult clients, and I honestly I don't have any at the moment. I've been blessed in being able to pick and choose my lanes, but in the past I've had difficult clients, and they became clients more along the lines of for selfish reasons. And what I ended up doing was noticing that it took an enormous amount of energy to maintain that client, and so I had them for about 2 years before I said, I've got to take a different path to I've got to expend less energy on this. It's just killing me.
Yeah, and depending on the role we're in, we may not, have that choice. So today we'll talk about some choices that we can make. The other side of that is, what can we do to help with the relationship? So, all right. I want to point this out because this not only applies to this session, but for me, this is one of the greatest lessons that I've learned, and it's so simple, right? And that is, all conflict is rooted in the mismanagement of expectations. And that is worth writing down. All conflict is rooted in the mismanagement of expectations. If we can just keep that simple premise in mind, that will help us in so many ways. All conflict is rooted in the mismanagement of expectations. I don't know who coined it. It may have been my Sandler trainer when I was a client, but that's where I learned it from. When I trained under Paul would talk about this all the time, and it really hit home one day when I was working through some communication issues with a client. And this next slide is just that. Communication also plays into this, right? But if we remember the golden rule, all conflict is rooted in the mismanagement of expectation. Communication issues are often a piece of that. And so, Tim, as you think about these couple of things, any thoughts that come into your head about mismanagement of expectations or communication?
Yeah, you know, I think the radical extreme of having crystal clear communication is actually having a written contract, like a legal document, which lays out all of the points and the the actual bullet points for what's about to happen. And so to tie the two together is beautiful, because again, miscommunication, tension happens when there's mismanaged and unclear expectations for what should be happening. And so again, the closer you can get to being real and laying things out, I mean, the less conflict you'll have with your difficult customers.
Yep. We've got some interesting things happening in chat. Adam wrote in, once you get a difficult client, they tend to latch on and come to you with all their problems. They tend to be needy, and waste your time. So I'm summarizing that a little bit. That is certainly something that can happen in there. And some of that has to do with mismanaged expectations, our communication, what we allow, what we don't allow. Other times we end up with difficult clients because of our own assumptions, judgments, and beliefs. It may be that the client is difficult. It may be that they're difficult because I've laid out some assumption, judgments, or belief with that client or on that client. So we've got to be very, very careful of that when we are engaging with clients, and we'll talk about this a little more in depth. The other thing is sometimes we just have a bad client. Sometimes we're just with somebody that, we're not going to jive with, right? And that's sometimes the case. So as you guys are listening, are there other reasons out there why you might end up with a bad client? I mean, we talked about mismanaging expectations, communication challenges. Sometimes you just have a bad client. Curious if you can think of any other reasons why you may end up with a bad client. Those are kind of some top reasons for me. New additions to the organization could be that. Yes, absolutely. Tim, can you think of any? As you're muted.
I don't even know how I did that, darn it. I think when the business shifts, and if there's not clear expectations laid out, and the client business shifts, if they de-escalate the engagement, for example, for whatever reason, out of necessity or out of desperation, you can have a client shift from being a good or acceptable client into a bad one. So sometimes there is an environmental, impact that has your client, go from good to bad. But you gotta roll with those punches, and that goes back to, you've got to just be clear in communication and expectations.
Absolutely. Yep. So what can we do about it? Michael Norton makes an interesting point in the chat. He says sometimes as salespeople, we identify just how difficult they will be during the sales process. We know it's going to be bad, but we need the sale and the commission, so we settle in and we suck it up and we accept the consequence, really, I think is what Michael's saying here. And that speaks to maybe an early point here of, we may be afraid to have the bold conversation to set the expectations with the client and establish that communication path. Steve Phones chimed in and said, we weren't truly listening or paying attention. Absolutely, that can be part of it. So we've talked on this webinar series before about upfront contract. If you are a Sandler client, or if you've been here in the past, you understand the upfront contract is a mutual agreement on the following. Number one, time. Number two, their agenda, your agenda. And number three, the outcome. The reason I bring this up is that this is a fundamental of communication, right? And the word in italics up there, mutual agreement, right? It's got to be mutual, is that there's a dialogue there. So we have an understanding on these things. I can use the upfront contract, the concept of it, to establish our communication and what will and won't happen. I can use it to have those bold dialogues if I need it. Now, just as an aside, and Tim, you probably see this, where it falls apart and where we get in trouble is when we don't have a clear, mutually agreed upon definition of the following, right? We don't have that dialogue and we don't enforce it. I'm sure you see this, especially with early attendees in our sales programs.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the traps that we can fall into, and I did this early in my Sandler career, was, I was okay with setting up my mutual or my upfront contract, but it really was more one-sided. I'd be like, okay, well, do we have the time? And then, I would gloss over their agenda and I would want to get more to mine. That was a mistake that I made early on. And again, it's hard to, breed trust, and it sets yourself up for all kinds of disrepair in the relationship if you're not having a mutually agreed upon conversation. If it's one way, then you're convincing, you're not selling. So that's a huge trap that I fell into early, and thankfully my coach kicked me in the head and showed me the error of my ways. But when you have
wise man he is.
What's that?
He's a wise man, not for just kicking you in the head, but showing you the error of your ways as well.
For sure.
The next one is, and I referenced this earlier, we've got to eliminate, to the best of our ability, our assumptions, judgments, and beliefs. I'm not saying get rid of the things you believe in, right? And we all have judgments and assumptions. Truly eliminating them is difficult, but I've got to set those aside and compartmentalize them when I'm dealing with clients, right? The moment that I walk in and I say, oh gosh, I have to talk to Tim, he's a pain in the butt, guess what? I'm going to look for evidence to support that. So I've got to set my assumptions and judgments and beliefs about Tim aside and truly just listen, right? We're given 2 ears and 1 mouth in that proportion for a reason. Our job is to pay attention. And speaking of paying attention, this is where we'll spend a little bit of time, which is on DISC. And so understanding their communication style, and I want you to chime in the chat if you are familiar with DISC. I know those who have experience with Sandler absolutely are familiar with DISC. When I have a difficult client, sometimes it's simply a function of a mismatch of styles. I'm not adapting to their style. And so when we look at DISC, and we'll do a little bit of a high level review of DISC here, but DISC is a personality profiling system which divides personalities into 4 quadrants or 4 buckets, if you will. We've got D styles, I styles, S and C styles. D styles tend to be direct and decisive, results oriented, no BS, bulldog in a china shop type of personalities. I's tend to be outgoing, spontaneous, talkative, enthusiastic. Tim, I'll let you talk about S's and C's at a high level.
Yeah. So your S's are your steady relators, and they're caring, they're supportive, they're pleasant and sincere. They're slow to trust, but once you get an S to trust you, they're loyal to the end. And then your C's are more analytical. Think in your mind's eye of like an engineer or an accountant, somebody who loves details, facts. They're very private. They're very logical. Those are your S's and your C's.
Sometimes when we have a difficult client, it is simply that I haven't identified their disc style correctly, and or I'm not matching and mirroring with them correctly. And so that leads to conflict and tension, right? And so as we think about, what we've talked about so far, right? My assumptions, judgments, and beliefs can get in my way, right? Not establishing our communication via, a good upfront contract can get in the way, or other forms of simply mismanaging expectations. You hear one thing, I expect another thing. Now we're in conflict, right? But I think the root of it comes to simple communication by and large. Not every time, right? But I think when we fail to match and mirror with somebody, then we set the stage for communication conflicts and potentially the view that this person may not be the best or the greatest client, right? And so when we look at how do we match and mirror, and this will be a review for a lot of people that are familiar with Sandler, but I've got to do those things in order to maintain that level of communication. If you think about your clients that are difficult, and I'm going to ask people to be brutally honest with themselves, when you have that difficult client, how often for you is it simply the fact that you're not on board with their communication style, you may not like or are comfortable with their communication style, and your intention because of that? So my style is D over I, right? And when I'm talking a C over to a C or an S, I've got to pay very close attention to how I'm communicating. Otherwise, we may not end up on the same page. There may not be a natural familiarity with each other's communication style. So if I don't put that energy in there, right, that may lead to some things down the road. And I can think of clients in the past, right, pre-Sandler, that I've had that were difficult, and it was simply I did not appreciate their communication style. Slow to decide, I'm very fast to decide. They want a bunch of data and analytics. I'm not a detail person, right? And so we end up in this conflict, and it's not because we're not great individuals or human beings. It's because neither of us have taken the time or the moment to match and mirror with each other, either because we didn't understand DISC. I did as a client, but there were certain people that just simply drove me insane, and it was easier for me to put a label on them, right? Pain in the butt client versus, really working to match and mirror. Tim, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's the reality is that there's a lot of tension. If you draw an X across the four boxes that you see in DISC, your D's and your S's and your I's and your C's, there's usually a lot of tension in their natural states. A D is going to struggle with an S because a D is super direct to the point, doesn't want to putz around with niceties, but your S is someone who they slow things down. They want clear definition in all areas, and they want to slow things down. And so there's going to be some tension there. Same thing with an I and a C. Your I is bouncing off of walls like a crazy squirrel, and I'm a super high D and a super high I. So I bounce around off of walls all the time, and it's a challenge to deal with someone who loves data, facts, and is more kinesthetic in the way that they communicate. And so you just have to sit there and think about what do you really want? If you have a challenging client, it could be as simple as recognizing where you're at in your DISC profile, and then figuring out, is there tension because the person that you're having a hard time with is literally just the diagonal opposite of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to figure out, do you want this relationship to survive and grow and thrive, or is this just something you're going to have to deal with until the end of the year, and then you can be done with that relationship and be out?
Yeah. Here's the reason, and thank you for that, Tim. Here's the reason for this whole topic, right? Is I'll hear, just as you do, we'll hear talk from clients about the fact that they're difficult. We have a difficult client. The reality is that it's upon us to take the time and fix that scenario, right? We've got to be the ones to take the lead and do the improved communication. So we have to be the ones to do that, right? We've got to acknowledge and recognize that when we have assumptions, judgments, and beliefs that get in our way, we've got to be the one to do something about that. Too often, and one of the things that I didn't put in here that I would like to have put in here is we've got to take responsibility for everything. And that's something that I teach in my training all the time. We've got to accept responsibility for everything. It doesn't mean I take the blame, but if I make an assumption or a judgment or a belief towards a client that is difficult, right, to me, then I've got to accept it and own it. And only then can I change the course of the relationship, assuming that the course of the relationship is worth changing, right? There are times when it's just best to let them go, right? But I think that when we look at difficult clients, we've got to look inward first, right? Have I accepted responsibility? Have I done the very best in terms of matching and mirroring in my communication? Are my assumption, judgments, and beliefs in check? Have I set a good upfront contract? And if I can do those things, I can repair that responsibility because I can repair the relationship because I've accepted responsibility for it. Now, if I've done all of those, right, and none of those are working, if I've put effort into it, it may just be time to say goodbye, right? And Tim, I'm just like me. I'm assuming you've had to say goodbye to clients in a respectful way. It does happen from time to time.
Yeah, it sometimes, again, it can hurt a little bit because, at the time that I get to that point where it's time to say goodbye, I've really done everything that I could do to salvage the relationship. I mean, a good client is a good client, and you want all of those. You're not always going to be, perfect matches with your clients, and so, for me, it's I look at it as unfortunate because by the time I do finally say goodbye, I've literally satisfied the inventory that I take of myself and understanding my contribution to the fractured relationship in the first place. And then you really have to determine, is this worth the energy?
Yep.
And if it's not, you got to cut bait and roll.
Yep. Now, I want to pause there on that thought because not everybody on this call is an owner, right, or has the ability to say goodbye to a client. And so what are the things we can do? So I want to reiterate, right, the accepting responsibility. And there have been times where I've taken responsibility and, been very vulnerable and humble in trying to work it out with a client that's been difficult, and it's worked to my advantage. Right? We've reset on bonding and rapport and actually have put it on steroids. We've gotten to a place where we've improved communication, improved the relationship. They've shifted from a difficult client to a great client. That certainly can happen. But for those of us that don't always have the ability to jettison a client, what can we do? Well, maybe there's an opportunity to move that relationship to another individual and have them take responsibility for it. Maybe there's an opportunity to reset the upfront contract of, when and how we engage in dialogue, for example. So there are things that we can do when we have a difficult client and we just can't let them go. There is something to be said, though, for really understanding the sweet spot of your ideal client and making sure that clients fit in there. Because going back to what Michael said earlier, right? I mean, and he implied this in, we accept the difficulties, we recognize them, but we want and need the sales, so we take them. Sometimes that does more harm internally than good. So it is really a good exercise internally to say, hey, are we working with our ideal clients? Do these clients fit, right? How do we make them better? Steve put recommit, renegotiate, right? We've got to be able to address it. If we have difficult clients, how do we get to a better place, right? With them, how can we change our communication? How can we reset upfront contracts, et cetera? Or maybe we just need to get to that point to, maybe it's time to let go. Thoughts on that, Tim, as we begin to close out this session?
Yeah, I mean, it's for non-owners, it's simply look at it like this. It's like being, having trouble in your marriage or your relationship. You could run off and get divorced right away, but yeah, you probably should invest as much time and effort into, taking that inventory and owning, your part of it and try to work it out, but, and sometimes it still ends up in divorce or a broken relationship, but you got to give it your best go. And so that's the good news there, is that it's very much like being married. It's not going to all be roses and rainbows. Sometimes it's going to be, it's going to stink. So.
Yep. And I think the key is that we've got to be the ones to own the responsibility, right? We can't expect, and I think this is a challenge and it's why I say accept responsibility for everything, is that if I externalize it and it's their fault because they're the ones that are a jerky client, nothing's ever going to get done, right? They're going to have high expectations and they'll be difficult, and you'll continue to externalize it. We have to be the ones to say, okay, I'm going to put my foot forward. I'm going to be committed. I'll be vulnerable if necessary to fix this relationship. And if you can't, then we can effectively, either way, if we can, we effectively deal with a difficult client. And if we can't, we have a path to deal with an effective client. So wonderful, wonderful discussion in the chat today. Really appreciate those who have engaged in the chat. I am curious, as we get down to our last minute and a half together or so, give me a takeaway from today. What did you hear that caught your attention? What's one thing that you can go out and use? Give us some feedback in the chat as we begin to close this out. Would love to hear from you. Sorry, I've either had too much caffeine or not enough. I'll let you guys figure it out.
How many cups of Starbucks are you on today so far?
You know what's funny? I carry that cup of Starbucks around all morning long. I only ever have one.
Seriously?
Yep, I only ever have one.
I've seen you go for an entire morning with. That's hard to believe. I've seen you run around with that thing.
That's because people think I'm constantly filling it up. So, yeah.
Good stuff.
Michael Norton had a great comment in here. Says we're like doctors in a lot of ways. Their first rule is do no harm. As salespeople, we should always look at doing no harm to our team, our company, ourselves by signing a problematic client. That is awesome, right? That is really awesome. When we bring on a toxic client, we're potentially doing harm within our organization. So we got to think about that. And look, we train people all the time that, we're independently wealthy and we don't need the business. There's something to that, especially when it comes to, that difficult client. I would never encourage anybody to accept a bad client just because you need the dollars. Often that creates more problems long term. So thank you, everyone. We're right at 1 o'clock. Appreciate you engaging in this session of our Wednesday grab and go growth techniques. If you've got questions about this, you need help with this, reach out to us. You've got my contact info, John's contact info, and Tim's contact info there. We'd love to be able to chat with you, help you in any way that we can. We do send out the recordings. I know that, Tim, do you have the recordings on your website?
Yep, sure do.
And we list them on our website. So that information would be right here. And so you can find us, you can find recorded episodes. Otherwise, we will see you guys in 2 weeks. We're not going to have a session. Actually, I take that back. I'll have to check the schedule.
I think next week we're off.
Yep, I think we are off. So we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, everybody. Thank you.